there, everyone, and welcome to Access Online. I'm Clint.
And I am Tanner. You guys probably don't see me all that often. I'm usually behind the camera, but for today, decided to come out and join Clint.
Yeah, hey, thanks for being with us. So I got a question for you before we get started today, and I'm going to ask you too. So if you're chatting online, did you do anything for Valentine's Day?
Oh,
we didn't practice this ahead of time.
We didn't. You totally caught me out of the blue with this one. My wife Colette and I had a wonderful Valentine's lunch at Paria.
Oh, okay.
So
that's good.
You know, real romantic here.
Thanks for not asking me because I'm gonna get
No. This is equal. So Clint, what was for Valentine's Day?
So my wife did some awesome things. She cooked dinner for us. The kids were both working, and so we got to actually have dinner. Unfortunately, I didn't do very much.
Yeah, the common thing that I saw in there was your wife cooked dinner, and okay, all right. Well,
yeah, I'm not proud.
There's always next year.
There's always next year. Mother's Day's coming soon.
Yeah, Mother's Day.
I won't forget that one.
Apart.
And her birthday. Actually, her birthday is before, so we got to
okay.
do that. So hopefully the rest of you guys didn't forget or didn't do Valentine's Day like me. Don't be like your pastor on that, but. A few things coming up. Like, we are so excited. We've got some in-person services coming up.
Yeah.
So, matter of fact, our next one is when?
It's tonight. At 5:30 at Eastmont Church.
Yeah,
so.
up in the upper building.
Yeah.
So we're going to do that, and then we're going to be doing 2 in March. We're going to do March 14th and March 28th, which is Palm Sunday. So we've got 2 in March, which we're really excited about. But then Easter is in April, the first week in April. There's some exciting news of what we're going to do in the next part. What comes the week after Easter? What are we going to do?
We are going to in-person services every Sunday night.
Every Sunday night. So we are going to do every Sunday night, 5:30 Eastmont, starting on April the 11th. And so we're excited about being back together again. And so just really looking forward to that.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be a lot of fun. Another thing is kids, right? Kids are such an important piece of who we are and what we do. And some of you may not know this, but Colette, who does our kids ministry, is actually your better half.
She is. She is definitely my better half all the way around. And she produces videos every week, and she also does our kids ministry as we're in person. And many of you may not have known, but on our website, if you go to accessbin.com/kids, you'll be able to see all kinds of videos on there. There's all kinds of activities and things like that, as well as a bunch of parent resources. So accessbin.com/kids, all kinds of resources for your kids while we're not meeting in person.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're just so thankful to that. We want to walk beside you as you live that out and raise our kids in such a world that's just, we don't know what's going on anymore, right?
Yeah.
And so with school finally starting back up, hopefully you got your kids back into school. It's somewhat, a little bit normal, but not completely. But we are so glad that you joined us today. We are going to be continuing on our message series here in just a few moments in Hosea. So looking forward to that. Did you catch last week what I said?
I caught, was there a Homer?
There might have been a Homer in there. I tried to say Hosea and Gomer, the wife, and it came out Homer. So today, if in my message I say Homer, you know what I'm talking about, right? So anyway, for those of you who know The Simpsons, right? You know, that would be the... So anyway, but we are glad that you're with us. Today we've got worship for you from some of our North Point partners. We're so thankful for them leading us in worship. And then tonight we're going to have live worship. Sammy and her band will be there tonight to lead us in worship as well. So we hope you can join us this evening. So this is just our time just to focus in, to lean in and allow God to speak and begin to work in our hearts and in our lives as He works in us and through us.
Yeah.
understand me. You understand me. And come to me in the valley of unknowns. You understand me. You understand me. You understand me, God. You understand me. So I throw all my cares before you. My doubts and fears don't scare you. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought. So I stop all negotiations with the God of all creation. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought you were. I believe, but help my unbelief. 'Cause you understand me. You understand me. Help me reach the faith that's underneath. 'Cause you understand me. You understand me. You understand me, God. You understand me. So I throw all my cares before you. My doubts and fears don't scare you. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought. So I stop all negotiations with the God of all creation. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought you were. Yeah. Oh, you're bigger, bigger. Oh. I will rest in the Father's hands. Leave the rest in the Father's hands. I will rest in the Father's hands. Leave the rest in the Father's hands. I will rest. I will rest in the Father's hands. Leave the rest in the Father's hands. Let it all go. I will rest in the Father's hands. We leave it all. Leave the rest in the Father's hands. So I throw all my cares before you. My doubts and fears don't scare you. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought. So I stop all negotiations with the God of all creation. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought you were. Yeah. You unravel me with a melody. You surround me with a song of deliverance from my enemies. till all my fears are gone. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. From my mother's womb, you have chosen me. Your love has called my name, and I've been born again into your family. Your blood flows through my veins. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. Oh, I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. Oh, oh, Great are you, Lord. Yeah, yeah. Great are you, Lord. And it's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise, pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. Yeah, oh my Lord, watch me sway. Darkness falls and we all pray, hoping for the light of day. Down to the river I have held the devil's hand, felt the weight of my own sin, burdened by the heart of man. Down to the river, down to the river.
So you know what makes for a good book, movie, or television show? For me, one of the best things that really make it work is a good plot twist. Like, I can't stand to watch a movie or read a book and you kind of know where it's going and what's going to take place and what's going to happen next. But when something comes unexpectedly that you didn't see happening or see something coming, to me, that's what makes it most enjoyable. We're in the middle of our series of Hosea, talking about God's scandalous love. Now, if you joined us last week, you may remember we were talking about Hosea, and Hosea is actually a prophet. Now, you're wondering, well, what exactly is a prophet? A prophet is the spokesperson for God. That kind of goes between and goes to the people to speak on God's behalf, and also goes and speaks to God on behalf of the people as well. So now we find Hosea, and Hosea as a prophet, he was actually the prophet of the northern kingdom of Israel. Now, Israel had been split up for over 200 years in the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. The northern kingdom had 10 tribes. The southern kingdom had 2 tribes, right? So they have 12 tribes total. So Hosea, as he is really ministering to the northern kingdom, which is those 10 tribes that's known as Israel, they finally begin to prosper again. Financially, they're doing well. Things are beginning to work and move in their economy, and I'm sure their housing, kind of like Bend, right, at one time. And everybody's doing good, but here's the problem. Even though people were flourishing personally, and maybe even financially, or even relationally, they were far from God. And God wanted Hosea to go, and he wanted Hosea to be the mouthpiece to speak to Israel, to let them know that God was brokenhearted because they had turned away from God. And so because God asked Hosea not to just proclaim something, but to actually demonstrate something. And so last week we looked and we saw where God comes to Hosea and says, Hosea, I want you to go, and I want you to take a wife, and she's going to be a prostitute. Now, wait a minute. So you're telling me a godly man who's supposed to be God's spokesperson, God tells him to marry a prostitute. Like, how do you tell your parents that? Like, how do you bring home the girl and go, hey, mom and dad, this is the girl of my dreams who God said for me to marry, and she's going to be a prostitute. And she's also going to be the mother of your grandchildren. And they actually had 3 children, and only one of the 3 was actually Hosea's child. The other 2 were illegitimate children that Gomer actually had because of her job and her profession of being a prostitute. I mean, you look at these family dynamics and you thought that your family had problems and was dysfunctional. But why would God do this? God is doing this because he wants to illustrate to the people of Israel that the way that they have been living is the same way of what's happening with Gomer and Hosea. that Israel has become the wayward, adulterous wife who has put other things before God, and God is a jealous God who's brokenhearted over the relationship that has been severed, this covenant relationship that has been severed because of her choices. And so today, as we look into this again and we talk about this, before we do that, let me just kind of back up, and as we look into the culture of what Hosea is ministering to, the bad part is people began to see things that were evil and began to call them good. Matter of fact, Isaiah 5:20 actually says this: "What sorrow for those who say that evil is good and good is evil, that dark is light and light is dark." And you read this, and this is from the prophet Isaiah. I even look at this even for our own day that we live in, how we even begin to see in our own culture today how we call evil good, right? And good evil. And God's just been brokenhearted over this. Now, I love where the Apostle Paul, we're going to go into Romans, into the New Testament just for a moment to kind of let you know. So Paul is talking about Israel in this moment. And in Romans chapter 1, he actually begins saying this and talking about the Israelites and the Jews. And it says this: they knew God. They knew who he was. But, look at this, but they wouldn't worship him as God or even give him thanks. Even though they know God and know that things come from God and God has blessed them, they wouldn't even give him thanks. And they began to think up foolish ideas of what God was like. As a result, their minds became dark and confused. I think how true that is even for our world today. People know about God, but we don't really acknowledge God and live for him. And our minds have become so dark and confused in what we see. Notice what it continues on in the verse here. It says, instead of worshiping the glorious, ever-living God, they worship idols made to look like mere people and birds and animals and reptiles. So the people of Israel have come to a place where they feel like it's better to worship an idol that looks like something else or someone else that's not in the image of God. It continues on saying this: so God abandoned them to do whatever shameful things their heart desired. God's like, fine, if that's what you want, you go ahead and do it. As a result, right, there are results, there are consequences to our choices, to your choice. As a result, they did vile and degrading things with each other's bodies. Continues on, their lives became full of every kind of wickedness, sin, greed, hate, envy, murder, quarreling, deception, malicious behavior, and gossip. Now notice, these things came out of people's life because they chose their own path, chose their own way, and chose not to honor God and live for God. That is the world that they are living in this moment. And the last one that we see here in verse 32, they know God's justice requires that those who do these things deserve to die, yet they do them anyway. Paul actually says, even in Romans again, for the wages of sin is death. That is the payment of sin that we do in our life. Paul's saying here, they know what they're doing is wrong, but they do it anyway. And matter of fact, not only do they do it anyway, look at the next part. Worse yet, they encourage others to do them too. So not only are they going down the wrong path, they are bringing other people with them, bringing this division between them and God. Now, the reason I went, and I think that's a great description that Paul puts together, I want you to see the world in which Hosea is living. And I would even say, even the world in which we live today, I think that describes it very truthfully as we see this and know this. So God is going to make his point and prove his point in these extreme ways. Because the reason he's asking Hosea to marry Gomer, what a horrible name, by the way, right? Who's a prostitute and have children of prostitution and have these kids. Why? Because God wanted someone who knew what it was like to be broken himself, to be able to truly speak of the brokenness of God that he had for his people, that he had for Israel. Now, Hosea and Gomer had these 3 children, as I told you before. And God actually gave them a name for all 3 of these children. Now, this is really important for you to see because this is going to come up at the end of chapter 2 that we're walking through today. And here are the 3 children. The first one was this, Jezreel, which actually means God will scatter. It's talking about God's judgment. That's kid number 1. Child number 2, who's the daughter, Lo Ruhamah. It means no mercy. God saying, I am not showing any more mercy to my people. And then Lo am I, which means not my people. Or in other words, not my child. Now, as we see this, God is showing the Israelites as through the life of Hosea, not just his life, but even through the names of the children that he has given Hosea and Gomer. Now, as we look at this and see this, can you imagine how Hosea must have felt in his marriage? Like, I'm sure at first he loved his wife Gomer, and maybe she wasn't even in prostitution yet. The things that I've looked at and seen, it really kind of leads it. She wasn't a prostitute until later in life. But somewhere she got dissatisfied in her marriage. And after one child, she began to go and look and try to figure out life and what that would look like and be. And then she goes and she begins to go and to sell herself, sell her body for sex. And this was part of the rituals of worship of idols and other gods. She became pregnant with not 1 but 2 children, and Hosea now is the father of 3, 1 that's his and 2 that's not. And along the way, Gomer got tired of living at home, and you can imagine one morning, Hosea wakes up and he's looking around the house and going, where's Gomer? He begins to go through the house and he doesn't see her and can't find her. And Gomer has left home and left Hosea to be a single dad with 3 children. Now, it wasn't supposed to be this way. You can imagine that even though Hosea was told what was going to happen, I am sure that the hurt and the pain thinking, maybe it's really not going to turn out this way. Maybe it's going to be better than this. And now he finds himself in a hurtful, broken space and place. And so we find Homer going, I'm all by myself. I'm raising 3 kids alone. He's well known at this time and moment as he's God's spokesperson. And I'm sure people were looking around going, how can he possibly be God's spokesperson? How can he possibly speak for God when he can't even handle and manage his own household? Look at his children. Look at his wife who's not even there anymore. In the brokenness and hurt that he must have been feeling. Now, the question I began to wrestle with as I was doing this message and preparing for it was, what caused Gomer to do that? What got her to the point that she thought that she needed to go into this lifestyle? That she would walk away and leave her husband and her 3 children? And the only thing I can come up with is, and I think this is what our world tells us, and it's a lie that Satan uses to tell us, is that we deserve more, that we deserve to be happy. And maybe she wasn't happy in her marriage. Maybe Hosea didn't take her out to nice restaurants anymore, and he didn't open the door the way he used to, right? Maybe these 3 kids are driving her nuts, and she feels like, is this what life's about? And she finds herself in a place that truly becomes self-centered, self-focused, and selfish. I think for all of us, that comes to a place when we find ourselves in a mess in our relationships, and especially in our relationship with God. It comes down to self-centeredness and selfishness. We want to be happy. We want what we want. We want what we want now. And we're willing to walk away from things to get what we think is going to be better, but truly it's not. Truly it's not. Now, as we see this and we begin to look at this, Hosea knows, because of what Gomer has done and what she is doing, that she could be stoned to death, because that was the penalty for committing adultery at this time. And I'm sure that even there were moments that Hosea was thinking, I'm going to make her pay for what she's done to me and these children. I can't believe she'd walk away and leave me. I would imagine the hurt and the pain and frustration and anger and maybe even resentment that began to come out. And the easy thing is, I want her to get what's coming to her. I want her to pay for what's taking place. And then God is going to lead us to a point where he comes to Hosea and he uses Hosea's marriage and life and even begins to speak into it of how he feels about Israel, who in this moment is his wife, right? Who he loves. And Israel has turned their back and beginning to go towards other gods and worship other gods instead of him. And so that is where we're going to pick up today in chapter 2. In chapter 2, we find that God kind of goes through this legal process. And he has Hosea speak this and write this out, this legal process of what's to come and what's going to happen and how this image of God's plan of how he's going to deal with Israel and their adultery of putting other gods before their God. And so we're going to pick up today in verse 2 of chapter 2, and it begins like this. But now bring charges against Israel. Now God is saying this, okay? Bring charges against Israel, your mother, for she is no longer my wife, and I am no longer her husband. I'm sure Hosea, as he's listening to this and hearing this and seeing this, I'm sure he's thinking, right on, God, I know exactly what you're talking about. I'm going to put Gomer's name in there instead of Israel's name, right? But as he says, bring charges against her. This is not what marriage is supposed to be. This is not how I can't continue to live life and go through this. In verse 4, it goes on to say this, and I will not love her children, for they were conceived in prostitution. Their mother is a shameless prostitute and became pregnant in a shameful way. Man, God just like opens up all the dirty laundry. And so he is using and paralleling Hosea's marriage of what's going on with Gomer and parallel it to what's going on with him and Israel. He says, listen, I'm going to love them because they're not my kids, they're not my children. He goes on to say, she said, I'll run after other lovers and sell myself to them for food and water, for clothing, wool and linen, and for olive oil and drinks. Do you hear what she says? I'm going to run and do whatever it takes to get what I want. And if I have to sell myself into sex slavery to get what I need and to get what I want, I'm willing to do it. One of the things I got to tell you as we look at this verse and think about it is, I wonder how often people look at this and you look and we know in our culture, and no different than culture there, that sex sells. Why else would people choose to be a stripper? Why else would someone choose to be in pornographic films or to be a prostitute? Because the money's good. Something they're trying to fill and find a place for, and so they begin to go and strive for that. And that's what God's saying, Israel, you are going to try to fill something and buy your own and do your own. And you're missing the point of what's going on and taking place. It continues on in verse 6. For this reason, I will fence her in with thorn bushes. I will block her path with wall to make her lose her way. Now, what God is saying is this. Because Israel is willing to go and sell herself and cheapen herself and cheapen our relationship and the love that I have for them, because of that, I'm going to begin to direct paths and put out paths and things that she won't end up back there again. Now, let me make this on a personal level for a moment. As a spouse, if you knew that your husband or your wife had a way that they were, maybe they were committing adultery and cheating. Maybe even as a parent, you see things with your child and the child that you love, and you see where they're going in the past that they are. Aren't you going to do whatever it takes to bring them back and put them back on the right path in the right place that you see them and you're looking for them. And that is exactly what God is saying. This is a picture of the redemption of God, of saying, I'm willing to redeem them and block their path. I don't want them to go that way. Continues on in verse 7. When she runs after her lovers, she won't be able to catch them. She will search for them, but not find them. She's going to look everywhere and try to find it. She's not going to be able to find it. Then, notice this, you got when and then you got then. Then she will think, I might as well return to my husband, for I was better off with him than I am now. What a beautiful picture that we see almost even of the prodigal son. The prodigal son is in the New Testament, the story that Jesus tells about the son who goes to his father and says, I want my inheritance now. And he goes and he blows it. And all the friends that he thought he had because of all the money he had, he lost them, and he finds himself working with the hogs, feeding them. And it's almost like one day all of a sudden he wakes up, he's eating out of this trough that he's feeding these animals with. And he kind of wakes up and he's like, what am I doing here? How did I get to this place? And it was in that moment that he thought, maybe I can go back home and my father will take me as a slave. Maybe not even as a son, but just as a slave. And as he goes home, his father sees him, and his father goes running, and he grabs him and he loves him, and he pulls him in and says, my son has returned. You were once dead, but now you're alive. And he put the signet ring and he put the robe, and he celebrated that his son had come home, that he finally had seen it. God is painting this picture of Israel. He's painting this picture with Hosea and Gomer, saying, even when it looks completely like there's nowhere else to turn, God's saying, I'm going to frustrate their plans in a way that they wake up and go, it's not worth it. I had it so much better with my spouse. Or God's saying, I want them to say, I had it so much better with my God, the living, true God. Not these false gods that I have put in my own place and created in my own image and the image of other things around me. It goes on to say in the next part, she doesn't realize it was I who gave her everything she has. The grain, the new wine, the olive oil. I even gave her silver and gold. God's saying, listen, I gave her all this stuff, all the stuff that she has. She thinks that somebody else gave it to her. And God's like, I provided it. Notice what happens. But she gave all my gifts to Baal. This false god sacrificing. And God's saying, I gave you these gifts. And you didn't thank me. You didn't even realize they came from me. But you began to worship and began to say how others were the ones that did that. You know, we do that even today. There's some of you that probably think, I have what I have because of the hard work that I've done, because of the education that I have, because of the smart investments that I've made. How do you think you had the wisdom to get through your school? How do you think you have the skills to build and to do and to work? How do you think all this and where this comes from? God provided that for you. This is what God is saying. Listen, I'm providing for her, for Israel. And she doesn't even recognize it. Doesn't even know what it is. But notice what happens because God says, because they don't recognize it, look what happens. But now I will take back the ripened grain and the new wine I generously provided each harvest season. God says, fine, and you don't recognize that your blessings are for me, I'm going to take them back. Now, look at the next part. Look where it goes. I will take away the wool and linen clothing I gave her to cover her nakedness. You know what? All the stuff you have for your clothes and what you have, I'm going to just take all that away. Continues on. I will strip her naked in public while all her lovers look on. No one will be able to rescue her from my hands. Now God says, I'm going to take away everything. I'm going to pull everything back. I'm going to strip her in front of everyone that she is exposed and others will see, and no one can rescue her from my hands. Now some of you are going, now God, how can you do that? God is showing and what God is exposing to Israel is that there is no other God, no other person, no amount of money or stuff that can save them or redeem them. Only God can redeem them. Do you hear me? Maybe you have been chasing after riches, a family, success. And know this, as you continue to chase that, you're going to continue to come up empty. And when God is no longer your first love and you put him on the back burner, there comes a point that God says, okay, I'm going to take this back and I'm going to remove my hand of blessing. I'm going to expose it. And it's in that moment that you realize, God, I didn't really do this anyway. This really didn't come from me. This didn't come from my hands. It came from you. Again, God's saying, listen, no one else can save you and redeem you and love you but me. In verse 12, he says here, I will destroy her grapevines and fig trees, things she claims her lovers gave her. Not only God saying, I'm going to take back and remove, he goes on, I'm going to destroy. Like they can really make grapevines and fig trees grow anyway. God says, listen, you think somebody gave you that? No, I'm the one that I'm going to destroy them. He continues on the next verse. I will punish her for all those times when she burned incense to her images of Baal, when she put on her earrings and jewels and went out to look for her lovers, but forgot all about me. You see this? God saying, I can't do it anymore. You hear this, the hurt that he's saying, I can't believe that they have forgotten, that she has forgotten me. Can you imagine if your spouse has forgotten you, all that you've done, all you've been through, the times that you have been there and walked behind and cared and loved and was a cheerleader, and now, they've forgotten all about you. God says, I can't do it anymore. I can't do it anymore. God shows us, as he speaks through Hosea, the picture of a God who loves his people, who's redeemed his people, but they continue to turn away from him and turn to other false gods. And it is a picture of God who is broken, who is hurt, who feels disrespected, disregarded because he had been. And God goes, fine, I'm going to let you just do your own thing. If that's what you want, that's where it's got to be. Then comes the plot twist. Right when it seems like God's saying, I can't do it anymore, I'm out, this is over, we're done, don't talk to me anymore, don't email me anymore, don't ask for me for anything anymore. Like that's where you think this is going. God's saying, I've had enough. God begins to do something amazing. This was where the plot twist happens. In verse 14, it says, but then. God says, I'm done. I'm going to punish him. I'm going to destroy all this. I'm going to take it away. I'm going to do everything. I'm tired. I can't do it anymore. The sleepless nights, the brokenheartedness. I can't do it. But then. But then what, God? Well, look what he says. But then I will win her back once again. God says, I'm going to go back one more time and love her and love Israel. And he goes on to say this. I will lead her into the desert. Well, that doesn't seem so great. Well, it's actually in the desert where they are removed from everything else that they realize that God is all that they need. Those desert moments in our life that sometimes seem to be a curse are truly many times a blessing in a way that God brings our attention back to him. Brings our affection back to him. He says, I'll win her back once again. I'll lead her into the desert. And then look at this next one. And speak tenderly to her there. God says, I'm not going to just yell at them, going, you just sinful, adulterous people, I've had it with you. God says, no, I'm going to speak tenderly. I want you to know that I still care and that I still love you. Look what happens in verse 15. I will return her vineyards to her and transform the valley of trouble into a gateway of hope. Did you see that? To me, this is one of the most beautiful verses in all of chapter 2. And this is one of those, for me, as I was reading it, right? I'm reading through this, and I got to this verse, and I just had to sit my Bible down and just let this spin over in my head just for a while. He says, I'm going to return all the things I took away. Those blessings, I'm going to bless again, give back. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to transform those valley of trouble, the pain, the hurt that they are. I'm going to transform that. And I'm going to turn it into a gateway of hope. Where it may seem that you are too far from God and there's no way back and there's no redemption, God says, as much as I want to be done, I love you too much to just walk away and leave you like this. I'm going to take this valley of trouble and I am going to transform it into a gateway of hope. He begins to point this picture toward Jesus. That in our own sins that we live in, we are all sinners, born in sin. And when we are left to our own sin, wages of sin are death or hell. People say, well, why would God send people to hell and good people to hell? He doesn't want to. That's why he sent his son, Jesus, to redeem us, to take this troubled valley we live in and make it a gateway of hope. Through Jesus and only through Jesus. And it goes on to say, look at this next part. She will give herself to me there as she did long ago when she was young, when I freed her from her captivity in Egypt. Oh, she will remember when she came out of Egypt, she was in slavery and we came across the Red Sea and I took the Red Sea and swallowed up the Egyptian army and I set them free. And they turned to me and they trusted me. She's going to turn back. I'm going to speak tenderly. I'm going to show hope. I'm going to show the love that she sees and knows and understands. Look at the next part in verse 16. When that day comes, says the Lord, you will call me my husband instead of my master. Now there's a big difference here, right? My husband is this loving relationship walking through it. My master means that I serve, right, someone else. Jesus sets us free, that we are no longer slaves. And Jesus says, listen, Israel, Hosea, when it comes to your wife Gomer, there's going to come a point that you're going to be her husband. She's going to be your wife. And that relationship is going to be renewed and restored and brought back together. Look at the next part. I will make you my wife forever, showing you righteousness and justice, unfailing love and compassion. The reason you will call me husband and not master is because I'm going to make you my wife, and I'm going to show you my love for you through my righteousness, being right, the justice that I bring for you, the unfailing love, unconditional love, compassion, grace, mercy, forgiveness, all of that I give back to you to redeem you, to love you. It goes on to say in verse 20, I will be faithful to you and make you mine, and you will finally know me as the Lord. You'll finally stop looking everywhere else, and you'll finally look to me and know that I'm yours and you're mine. And what a beautiful story. What a beautiful way that God is unfolding this. And verse 22 continues on to say this. And they in turn will answer Jezreel. Remember Jezreel in the beginning, we brought this up, was God will scatter. Now God's saying, I'm going to change not only what you think, I'm changing your name and what it means. And I'm going to redeem you. It's no longer Jezreel, God will scatter. It's Jezreel, God plants. In that time, I will plant a crop of Israelites and raise them for myself. He goes, I'm going to flourish you and plant you in a great and mighty way. Look at the next part. I will show love to those I called not love. Remember the daughter? Her name was not love. God says, I know I said you're not love, but I'm going to show you love anyway. That unconditional love, that unfailing love. And to those I called not my people. This was the third name of Hosea's second son. Not my people. I will say now, you are my people. Whew, that's good. God is saying, I can redeem you. I will redeem you. As much as you've hurt me and you have committed spiritual adultery and put other gods first, it is because of my kindness and my love that I call you back to myself, and that I will love you and redeem you and make you mine all over again. And in the last part of this verse, in this chapter that would close up, and they will reply, you are our God. Man, what a journey. God's saying, I chose Israel to be my wife. She was unfaithful to me. She had illegitimate children out of her prostitution. She turned to other gods. But because of my faithfulness and love and my character, because I continue to love Israel, because I continue to go, and even through the hard things, even through the consequences, even through all of that, I have shown them my love. And because of that, they finally come to a place saying, these aren't gods. You are my God. Today, I want to close this message today. The thing we talk about at Access all the time is that no matter where you are or where you've been, that God wants to work in you and through you. And I can't tell you any more that we see that in this moment. Maybe you have been looking for something. Maybe you are self-centered and selfish and you want what you want. And let's just be honest. God is just kind of out there, and when you need him, you go to him. But honestly, he's not your God. You've allowed other things to be your God. And God's tired and he's fed up and he's jealous and he's broken and he's hurt. But just like in this moment he's telling Hosea about his wife Gomer, it's also this picture of himself and Israel. And he says, listen, I want to redeem you and I want you to turn to me, but it is your choice to do so. Maybe you're going through some deep, dark moments right now and you can't figure out why. God is leading you there. Maybe he's leading you through the desert because you're going to get to a place that you recognize that you've been missing, that God is your God, and God is using that desert moment to bring you to a place to redeem you, restore you, renew your relationship with him. So I got to ask you, where are you spiritually in your relationship to God? We live in a world that is going to continue to fill us with lies and continue to say what's evil is good and what good is evil. We have to be redeemed and know we are restored because of God, because of what he did through Jesus, giving his life for you and I. So right now, would you come to a moment, and I just got to ask, is God your first love? He is calling for you and crying out for you to being redeemed to him. Father, thank you for our time, and I just thank you for the story of Hosea. And Lord, as hard as this is, and it seems harsh in the moments, God, we see a true picture of your love and your compassion and your unfailing love, your hesed, your loving kindness that you have towards us. Jesus, would you use that to draw us to you, draw us closer to you, that you are our God, we are your people, and that we serve you with all of our heart and all that we are. Lord, would you just convict us and show us if we have put other things before you? God, convict us. God, may we be brokenhearted, and would we come to a place of true repentance and confession before you now? And God, you are our God. would you just work mightily in each one of our hearts and our lives. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you so much for joining us for part 2 of Hosea. Next week, I'm excited. We're going to actually be in chapter 3, and we're going to see where God is going to take from chapter 2 and said, okay, Hosea, I want you to take this and demonstrate this with your own life and marriage with Gomer and demonstrate my love to Israel. So be sure to come back next week and join us on Facebook, YouTube, accessbin.com, or even our app that you can come and be a part of. But guys, I tell you, I love you. I'm thankful for you. And I'm excited to see what God's going to do in and through of all of us as we continue on through the story in the book of Hosea.